Здравствуйте, дамы и господа. Мы в зеленой гостиной Большого театра принимаем сегодня потрясающего гостя. Я счастлива, что Джон Ноймайер нашел эту возможность быть сегодня с нами в зеленой гостиной. We are very sort of limited in time, unfortunately, while your life in the art is so long and big and interested that I have several blocks I will be asking about.
Okay.
The first thing for me would be to find out what was your mother's reaction when you decided that you want to dance? And your father also. How the family reacted on this wish?
It's very strange because I think that I was attracted to dance before I knew what dance was. My mother took me to movies. I liked the best the musical films, and I liked it best when they were moving, when they were dancing. And I was upset if they were speaking too much. And out of this grew a feeling for dance, instinctive. I moved in the house, and one day I said I would like to study dance, and they
where to study
really
dance,
understand.
Yes.
Well, there are many private schools in Milwaukee. There was no major school, but private schools, and so I was allowed to begin. But tap dancing, because they could imagine this. They could imagine this, and I said, yes, it's okay, it's fine, I can do that, but it's not exactly what I want. And then I could study acrobatic dancing, and finally, after I don't know 1.5 years, I could study ballet in this little private school. And for me, it sounds almost like a kitsch, you know. But this day of beginning classical ballet training was like returning to something that was new, but that you knew very well. It was a feeling of happiness to do this. And although my father was a captain of a ship, and my mother was really a housewife, they didn't understand it, but I am very grateful that they always try to understand.
And they give you permission to do what you wanted.
Exactly.
And when you decided to move to England first, I understand, you won this scholarship to go to England?
No, I had scholarship from the university because I did many things at the same time. I was studying ballet in Chicago now because it was a quite professional school. The teacher from this ballet school came to the university because in the theater department, this priest who was running the theater department, he was very interested in the connection of dance and theater. So we had very good dance training. So I had really training every day because 3 times in the week I would go to Chicago, 90 miles away, come back, do my studies in the university. And when I received a scholarship from the university to make 1 more year of study. And I originally wanted to go to Copenhagen because there was a great teacher there, Vera Volkova. But it was not possible to study in Copenhagen. But I wanted the experience of Europe, of another country. And so I went to the Royal Ballet School. But studied with Volkova in the holidays, the school holidays. And this was one of the most important teachers in my life, but not only for dance, for my life, for my understanding of the idea, the philosophy of being an artist.
Because I read somewhere that you said that this man, this priest,
yes,
he also taught you something, and you said, I feel like Christian and dancing Christian. And
yes, yes, it's true. No, he was a priest. He was a Jesuit priest, but he taught me really what it meant to be an artist. The sense of dedication, the sense that that it is a privilege to be an artist, but it's a great responsibility, the discipline that is necessary to be an artist, the fact that you never can, if you choose to follow this privileged life, you can never say no to it. It is something which is, it is really a calling. to have this life. And he lived this way, I think, both as in his sense of spirituality, of his sense of it was the Catholic Christian faith, but also in the way he ran this little university theater, which was very prominent at that time in the city. It was a very important theater.
So it was like theater production, like
exactly.
Drama theater production. And when have you heard about Madame Volkova?
I heard about Madame Volkova when I was studying, and through some friends, I met a girl who was dancing in the New York City Ballet. And I said, who is the greatest teacher for men, do you think, in the world? And she said, Vera Volkova in Copenhagen. And from that moment, I had this fixation to study with her.
And to come to her, you had to read her letters, to call her, to be accepted?
To reach her, I had a letter of recommendation from some teachers in the English school, the Royal Ballet School. And it was an unforgettable moment for me, and very typical of Vera Volkova, because I had to find her in this complicated Royal Theatre in Copenhagen with my letter and my eagerness to study with her. And I handed this letter to her, which she read. I disturbed her in the middle of rehearsal. And she looked at me and she said, "You are a dancer?" And in the way she said this, there was something so special about being a dancer. And in the same sense, her sense of wonderment at anyone being a dancer. And there was something that happened between us that was immediate. And it was not only the classes which she gave to me, private classes and coaching and so on, but we met almost every evening and had dinner together, and she spoke about some parts of her life, her feelings about dance, her feelings about other artists that she had worked with and trained, like Margot Fontaine was her great student. So it was for me an unforgettable moment, an unforgettable teacher in my career.
And then you were invited by Kranko at a certain moment, or even Marcia Haide noticed you somewhere.
Well, this was a very important moment, because it was Marcia Haide who noticed when I was in the school. At that time, an American citizen could not work in England. The rules were extremely rigid at this time. So I knew I had to return. And I was dancing in a ballet by Roland Petit for a school performance, and Madame de Valois, who was then the director of the Royal Ballet, she coached me in this role, and she liked me very much. And of course, for me, she was a very great woman, and she called me and said, you know, what will you do next year? And I said, I have to go back to America. And she asked where I would go, and I said, well, Ballet Theatre or New York City Ballet. And she said, you must go to George Balanchine. And I said, well, okay. And she said, we are going on tour. I will speak with George about you. Okay. In the meantime, Marcia Haide and her partner, Ray Barra, came to visit the school. It was, I'll never forget, it was a class of folk dance. And I was doing mazurka, and I love to do mazurka. And I was quite good in doing this mazurka, and I was kind of showing off a little, maybe. And after this, the teacher said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, Madame de Valois said she would speak to George. And she said, the teacher, these two people watching the class, one is Marcia Haide, she is the principal dancer in Stuttgart. And if you like, you could go to John Kranko's company in some place I never heard of in my life called Stuttgart. And I said, well, I have to wait for Madame. So Madame de Valois came back. And the British, of course, are very distanced. And I was very shy. So although we passed in the hallway, she never said anything to me. And I never had the courage to ask her. So I decided to take the job in Stuttgart, and I signed the contract. And 3 days later, Madame de Valois stopped me in the hallway and said, oh, by the way, I spoke to George Balanchine, and you can go to New York next year. And I said, but I can't. I've already signed a contract to go to Stuttgart. And of course, the Valois knew John Krenko because he was, of course, connected to the Royal Ballet. And she said, oh, of course, that's good for you. So it's very interesting. My whole career would have been completely different because I would have returned to America after 1 year in London and begun working with the New York City Ballet. And I'm sure I would have become choreographer because I think it was what I was destined to be. I think that from the beginning of my ideas about dance, already in the university, in the theater which Father Walsh was running, I had been doing choreography for musicals and for certain plays, and even I made a small ballet before I even went to Europe. So my feeling was that I loved movement, I loved to perform, but I think that creativity, the idea of making something new, of designing with human bodies, with human beings, with emotion, with the idea of what because I had studied drawing and painting before. And in a sense, choreography meant for me bringing together my studies as a dancer together with what I felt myself as having studied painting. And at one point in my life it was really a decision. Do I want to be an artist in the sense of a painter, or do I want to go into the field of dance?
And of course, in your career, you staged so many different ballets, and numbers of them are related to great literature. And I was wondering if this sense you got from Krenko, who always liked to make a ballet on big stories, or maybe I know that you even studied literature in university, so you are also not only in painting but also in literature.
No, it was. I think the connection comes really at that. The very important years in the university when I studied my major study, because it was Jesuit university. My major study was English literature. So I was very interested not only in English literature but even Russian literature. And I think that all of that idea of literature as a source of the possibility of creating something which is not literature, words being translated into non-words, is something that was much before Krenko. Because I think that the time with Krenko, which was also a time of learning, I would say, more craftsmanship, how to make a ballet, less than his particular philosophy of what was important for him, because he was an incredible storyteller, but in a very direct way, in a very simple way. And when I watch his ballets, I still am full of admiration, because it's incredible how he can make a story so incredibly simple, so incredibly clear for anyone. I think my idea was always more complex. I think that my idea of telling a story had to do with other levels, experimenting with other levels of communication through visual human images. Which was not only directly telling a story, because even in the literature ballets that I've done, they are all very different, because I think each piece, if you are going to translate words into non-words, it demands a different concept, a different formula. You cannot simply do it as you know very well. The worst translation is word by word, right, because it doesn't make any sense in the end. And so for me, literature is not something that I use like someone who's cooking and uses a cooking book, and then it tells you what you need, 2 eggs and 1 flour and everything. But it's only a jumping off point, because my ballets and literature are not literature. Ballet Chaika is not Chekhov. Chaika is my reaction to having read Chekhov and what I feel about this work and how I could translate those essential ideas into a non-verbal way. And it's different with every piece, Lady of Camellias or Otello or whatever work I might do. I have to first understand this work and imagine it in a non-verbal world and understand what are the levels I could illuminate in that.
I wonder, when Kranko passed away so sudden, I understand you've been proposed to take over also the Stuttgart company, but you decided not to do it.
It was a very difficult moment because it was exactly the moment when I should begin in Hamburg. He died the summer before I was to begin in Hamburg. I was leaving Frankfurt and it was already signed. The contracts were already made for that season, and I think it was the right decision, because I think that the how would we say it, the look, the idea, the concept of the Stuttgart Ballet was already so strongly associated with Kranko, that I myself at that time, being young and full of new ideas of how I would do things, which were absolutely not the way Kranko had done them, it would have been a great conflict. I think for the people, I think it would not have been good for myself. I think it would not have given me the freedom to experiment and develop an identity from my own ensemble as it has developed over the last 40 years.
Just very interesting how life moves you in a sense, because with Balanchine you had already Kranko, and then with Stuttgart you already had Hamburg.
Yeah, it is interesting because actually the story is so complex, because the first time I met Kranko was actually in Copenhagen, introduced by Vera Volkova, who said, because Vera Volkova also believed I should go to Balanchine, because I think she respected him as one of the great masters, or maybe the great master at the time. But when I met John Kranko, she said, well, maybe if it doesn't work with Balanchine, maybe it would be interesting to go to Kranko. And it actually happened in the life, It's very interesting to write down all these.
And then I know you were dancing with Kranko, but was there any special moment in your life when you decided that dancing itself, it's a sort of secondary to the choreography?
I think that when I was in the university, all of my concentration was on creativity. As I say, I tried to get the best education I could in the sense of classical ballet, but I think the combination of working in a theater, being interested in theater, being interested in acting myself, being interested in dancing myself, but mostly interested in making dances, I thought, but stop. First, I have to be a dancer, because this body, this person, is my instrument. I have to train this instrument to be articulate. And the greatest training for articulation, I believe, is the classical technique. I still believe that someone who has mastered, who has worked in this classical technique, can, if they are talented, go into other fields. So when I went to London, I tried to suppress all creative feelings, to only concentrate on myself, to be a great dancer. And I think I went to Stuttgart with this feeling at the beginning that I didn't want to think about creativity. I wanted to think about myself as a dancing personality. And I think that it was actually a friend, that I knew from my school in Chicago, who'd also joined the company, and said, well, what ballets have you made since you've been here? Because there was a kind of group where you could, young choreographers could do things. And I said, I haven't done anything. And he said, well, why? You must. And it was very interesting that the moment I did the first work, it freed also something in me as a dancer, because I was a very special kind of dancer. I was not the great classical dancer. I had a very particular vocabulary, a particular style, a particular way of moving, which was a combination between a classical dance and modern movement. And it was actually in creating that it freed me as a dancer. So the transition was completely harmonious and completely organic. I never at the moment said, I'm going to, at this moment, stop dancing. Because when I was in Frankfurt, my first company, I needed myself as a solo dancer. And when I went to Hamburg, I was still dancing. So certain ballets like Romeo and Juliet, I actually created for myself in a certain sense. But gradually I realized that I had so many and so strong responsibilities as a choreographer that I could do less and less. But even, I suppose the last time I performed was at the most 5 years ago, I think, when I performed the St. Matthew Passion, the main role. And then I did, because Maurice Béjart created a very interesting work for Marcia Haydé and myself called Les Chaises, the Chairs. And when Maurice died, at our gala, which is called the Nijinsky Gala every year, in his honor, I danced this piece once more. So that was actually the last time I did. But it was as if I never had the feeling, now I'm going to stop, I'm going to sit in a chair and be a choreographer, whatever that means. Because I feel that the choreographer should basically never stop moving. Because it is in the personal, very specific movement coming from an interior motivation of a choreographer that makes his signature. And so even now, if I choreograph, I don't sit and speak to people and tell them what to do. I move. Obviously, I can't move like I did 20 or 30 years ago. But it's necessary for me to sweat to make a choreography.
I remember talking here with Marcia Haydé, and she said how you was creating Ladies with Camellia, and she said that your way of working was very different from Kranko, because you would have come all prepared and you would have known exactly all the movements. So do you invent it all on yourself in a sense, and then you just put it sort of on the singers,
No.
or it changes with
I think,
dancers?
I think maybe what Marcia meant is something different. Kranko was definitely a choreographer who came to rehearsal in a suit with street shoes, and he sort of would indicate something. Particularly at the moment of Lady of the Camellias, I was a dancer, and I danced every part. The pas de deux, which we made, I did everything. I did all of the lifts and all of the movements, and I was prepared in a different sense. And I think this is important, that I suppose it was early, Lady of Camellias was pretty early in my career. I'm very pragmatic. The young choreographer usually has the least time to rehearse. And so he must be prepared, because he's not going to have unlimited time. I think as I progressed, I prepared myself, as I do for any project that I'm doing, through secondary literature or reading or looking at photographs or trying to understand a period, trying to understand a concept, making notes, making a concept. But I think that it's very important in the moment you enter the studio to begin work. We have to forget all of this, because the actual doing at that moment is what is important. Dance or ballet is always concerned with the present tense, now. you cannot make a ballet remembering something you wanted to express. What you want to express has to happen at that moment through your improvisation, through the way your dancers see that improvisation and maybe interpret it, how two people coming together, two dancers coming together, their relationship, their particular chemistry will determine what is the relationship between these two people. For example, Lady of the Camellias, the original cast was Marcia Haydée with a dancer from Stuttgart called Egon Matzen, who was a wonderful actor-dancer. He was not particularly strong partner. When the ballet was renewed, was redone for Hamburg, it was Kevin Hagen, who was a very strong partner. And so we began to work again, and the pas de deux of Lady of the Camellias are those which were made actually with Marcia and with Kevin Hagen, rather than the others. So it is, you are, as a choreographer, obviously limited, or not limited, but you are inspired, let's say, by those people that you work with and what their capacities are, but also how their relationship works. And that's why for me the casting of a ballet is extremely important, and not only two people who may be the main roles, but the balance within a cast of how, for example, in Lady of the Camellias there are approximately 10 principal roles, how the balance of those characters work together to make the richness of what I believe is a great ensemble, as we have it with a great dramatic theater, who has an ensemble, who can work together, and each role, if it is a smaller role or a larger role, has a strength and an energy and a dynamic that contributes to the whole thing.
And you never worked with dramaturg, you were doing yourself the whole
Always.
story.
I think it would be impossible for me. I could never actually work with a written script that someone else had done, because I think for me the essence of a work using a dramatic source, using a literary source, is the eye of the person who will create it, who will translate it in creation to another medium. And if you would write to me how you see Pushkin's poem Eugen Onegin, I would say that's very interesting, Katya, but you know, I'm not sure if I see it that way. I have to find me in the piece, because I can only choreograph through me. That doesn't mean every person is me, but the honesty of them is my honesty. I cannot choreograph a character I don't believe in. I can't choreograph Don Juan and just say, well, there is this character in many pieces of literature, Don Juan, but I don't know what he's about. I think he should do glissade jeté, glissade jeté. Do you know, I can only really begin to be that character, and out of the corner of me, where there is a piece of that character in some degree, can I really choreograph.
But then time goes, and for example, Jürgen Rosa was saying to me, I have to look now after Lady with Camellia, which I made in 1978. Nowadays my taste is totally different. I moved forward, but I have to preserve it the way I did. When you are now working on Lady with Camellia here in the Bolshoi, do you feel the same? Did your perspective change, or you still feel it as very much as yours?
No, it's very different, because Jürgen Rosa delivers Lady of the Camellias, and he is there for the premiere, and he's very concerned about it and worked very hard on it, but then he leaves. But I live with the works, and this is the very point of being a director for a long time. I've been a director in Hamburg for 40 years. Why? Also because I want to live with the works and judge them daily, if necessary. When I'm in Hamburg, I see every performance. not because I think all the performances are wonderful and the ballet is a genius or whatever. I see it because I want to judge it critically and to know, does this move me? Is this right? Is this logical? Or do I have to change it? And there is an evolution in the piece. I think even if we look at the film, there's a rather relative early film with Marcia Haydé, which is wonderful. She's extraordinary in it. But I think I would never ask a ballerina today to look at that film and try to do it as she did it. Because I think you can only be believable, really honest and believable in a role if it is concerned with how we are, how we live today, and what is our relationship to those situations and emotions which are in this piece. Are they absurd for us? Are they not to be understood? Or is the idea of a deathly sick woman who clings to life through material things, who then finds love, is this not a possibility also in our day? Is there not a way to imagine that this story is real? It is an honest possibility within the human situation. And I think for me, if I were to see a ballet that hasn't been done for years, if we revive things as we do in Hamburg, because we try to keep, I mean, I've created about approximately 150 works, which are all in our repertoire, and we bring them back. And if I see something which I find is wrong, I will redo it. In the coming season, we are going to revive Alfred Schnittke's Per Günt. And I am declaring it as a premiere, because I know, because I've seen parts of it in a film, because I had to do a kind of lecture about it for the Schnittke sort of foundation in Hamburg. And I feel that very much of the work I can do better now. So for me, I believe that choreography is the work of a living artist. So long as this artist works, each of his works is only a work in progress. And he must determine at every moment of his life, what is the version we are doing now? Is this valid or is it not valid? And I don't have respect for saying this should be kept as a museum piece. I believe in museums because I sort of live in one myself. But I don't believe that choreography is a museal art. I believe it is a work absolutely of the present tense. And if it does not speak to us, if we cannot understand it, if we cannot experience it as a person living today, then it should be forgotten.
So I spoke also with Balanchine Foundation how to preserve the thing, what to do with this, because once choreographer is gone, then it stays in a certain form.
Yeah.
Then you have to choose the form which could be sort of a right one for a while at least.
Yeah.
How to do it, I don't know.
I think it's very difficult, particularly because we all see things differently, and even the people who work closely with me, I think they see different things. I realize that with ballet masters who recreate works that I've done, who they see a certain color, they see a certain line, they see a certain movement, and which perhaps they can emphasize. And when I see it, I say, but why is that so important? That is not so important for me. And so it's difficult. I think it's a problem I cannot solve. I can only continue to work, continue to try to make things clear. It's one of the reasons for reviving Per Günt, because I would like to make that work clear, how I believe it should be, what was the original intention, and what is the possibility of achieving this intention now for myself. And I think there will be a number of works which I have continued to work on, and there of course today we We have so many films and so many things. There will necessarily have to be a choice in how to do it. But I would hope that anyone who would be reviving a work of mine would see it in the sense of its immediate human expression, its immediate human communication. And if it's not there, to leave it alone.
At least to be sure that you have some collaborators who can understand your mind.
Yeah, I think that the text is clear, because we have many of the ballets are written in Benish notation. They are filmed many times, so we have documentation about it. I think who can give the spark of life to a work, which defines it as a work of today, this is the important thing. And this is something I can't determine. I can create a foundation which has all the possibilities, which has all the necessary access to my archive, to all the films which have been done. But in the end, there is a moment, I suppose, I don't suppose, I know, when the artist must let go.
Yes, and you really have a great foundation, wonderful foundation, and a museum where you live, and you have a company and you have a school, but it's like a huge enterprise which you are running. Where do you find forces for this?
There are certain questions which are better not asked.
That's right.
Do you know, I once knew a really great actor in Germany. He was called Will Quadflieg, and he was one of the greatest German actors I suppose, early in the 50s, 60s. I knew him in the 70s. And he, in his head, had all of Rilke. He could recite the entire Rilke just sitting with us here. And he was once asked, but do you know, how do you do this? And he said, please don't ask me. I don't know, because it might go away. It might, I don't know. I think that for me, it begins from my beginning, and this feeling of living in Milwaukee, not understanding what is dance, but having a sincere and a deep love for it. And as my life continued, the great experiences and privileges which I've had in regard to that have inspired me, well, not inspired me, I think are a result of the love that I have for this profession. The whole idea of the collection, to try to put together the I suppose in one sense, the memory, the charm, the wisdom of the past, which, interestingly enough, recurs. The problems in 18th century choreography were more or less the same problems that we had today. There are certain lines which go through all the periods. But to have all of these things together means, from one point of view, to honor those people in my past who are behind me, who have brought me and my work to the point where I am able to be, to try to preserve them, to bring them together in a sense, so they can have this incredible dialogue with each other, this discussion with each other in the plays, to save them from either destruction or being in some schickimicki drawing room, to try to constantly understand more about Václav Nijinsky and the genius of this particular person, who I think is one of certainly one of the few greatest artists of the 20th century. Yeah, all of these things give me energy.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And I'm very thankful for having John Neumeier with us tonight at our green room. was so beautiful the way you speak it.
Was that okay?
And you make it all round, coming
Okay.
back to Milwaukee.
Okay, that's
Of
fine.
course, I mean, because we don't have enough time, I would love
Yeah.
to record more about Nijinsky, about Preobrazhenskaya, about Uladova,
Yeah.
about all your connections, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
you have to cut sometimes.
Somewhere
because-
you have to cut. But it is interesting, the connection. Because I myself don't even think until I'm asked. And that's why sometimes I have to take a year to try to write some of these things down.
You didn't.
No,
You should.
no,
At
because
least dictate them.
all of these, you know, like the relationship to Ulanova, you know, that I met the first time here in this theater in that red room, you know, on the stage, she and how this developed until the last time I saw her, when she lived in that big building,
Mm-hmm.
in this kind of fuchsia bathrobe, and she gave me this little teddy bear, and
As a present?
yes, and it was incredible because she said, you know, ask me anything, I will tell you everything. It was very short, it was shortly before she died, and heartbreaking because I came downstairs and she was at the window in this fuchsia robe. It was so incredible moments with her, or the moment when, you know, she came to Hamburg to coach Giselle the first time, and she saw the Third Symphony of Gustav Mahler, and she was so impressed and said, you know, this, you've created something which is the future of the classical ballet, and so and so. And then she saw Romeo and Juliet, and she didn't say anything.
She was herself quite a Juliet, of course.
And the next day, and there's a photograph of this, because I came into rehearsal, she stopped and she embraced me. And we have just this moment as a photo. And she said, I'm sorry, I couldn't speak to you yesterday, because it was such a shock to me, this interpretation, to something that for me is so different and so important for her. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't, and she didn't lie. She didn't say, oh, that was very nice, because she couldn't understand what I was doing in this version. And so there were these very nice moments, and they all have some kind of connection, because she, her mother was
Yes,
important
Roman
teacher,
was a teacher in
and her
the
mother
school.
was the teacher of
Volkova.
Volkova. You know, and Volkova told me at the conversation with the mother that the mother said, but why didn't you stay? And, you know, why did you go to the West? And she said, but you have such a wonderful daughter. You don't need me. And so it's an interesting connection.
And then this cross of Preobrazhenskaya, which you really have.
Yes.
And all her collection.
Yes, because there was a lady called Elvira Ronet, who is actually from Riga originally. But she was a dancer. She studied dance, and she studied dance in Petersburg with Preobrazhenskaya privately. And then, years and years and years later, when Preobrazhenskaya in 21 went to Paris, she became a kind of assistant in her studio and was very, very close to her. I didn't know this, but one day when we were in Paris with my company, I received this letter, and it said, long letter, you know, you are an artist and blah, 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 and, you know, and so, and I would like to present you with the Tsar medallion of Preobrazhenskaya. And I said, well, you know, it must be a crazy lady, so she should come in the interval between two performances. So this lady came, and she made a speech, like really speech about Preobrazhenskaya, and she was very idealistic woman in her thinking, also later of choreography, and she gave me this medallion, which the Tsar gave to her for 25 years of service in Mayinsky, and she said I should give it to another idealistic person. And she gave me this Fabergé medallion. So I became a very good friend with this lady who lived in an apartment in Pigalle, 1/3 of this room, where everything of her life was stuck in. And when she died, I mean, she gave me many things of Preobrazhenskaya, and when she died, she willed everything to me. And in the apartment, I finally found a diary of Preobrazhenskaya with some of her class notes written, which is interesting. And Irina Jakobsen translated it for me. So
you're publishing it, or not?
We haven't published. I think it's too fragmentary to publish. But I think in connection, Irina thought it would be interesting to publish this in connection with Vaganova and in relation to how Irina Jakobsen herself, who was a pupil of Vaganova, developed her own training when she went to the West to teach Western companies. Unfortunately, Irina Jakobsen is very ill.
Right, in Israel somewhere.
Very ill, and it's so sad because in a way, she wrote a letter which was like a goodbye. Because she used to come twice a year to Hamburg for 2 months.
And still now you're creating 2 creations per year, or it became less rigid?
Less rigid. Less rigid. I mean, sometimes it's 2 creation, sometimes it's more, and sometimes it's less. It's different, but.
But when I was at Nijinsky concert, which itself is a great invention, I really like it. For so many hours you're showing it's a real right for love of ballet, for love of dance, and it's a real dedication to Nijinsky, I guess, and to his memory as well. But I feel they're a bit like in Bayreuth, because it's really like this holy land.
Yes, because you can't get a ticket also for this.
Yes.
For this evening, it's the hardest ticket in the whole city, Germany, to get a ticket to this performance.
Yes, but also, I mean, you came from Milwaukee, and now you created such an empire of dance.
It's strange that it's something
wonderful
to think about.
And I hope your mom, she lived through, right, to know what you achieved?
Pretty far. She, approximately the first 8 or 9 years of Hamburg.
At least this. And then your love for Nijinsky, of course. This is probably a special other interview dedicated to Václav. Thank you.